Good evening, everybody, from NJRR Live Studios here in North. We are coming at you for the last NJRR Live of the decade.
Oh, wow.
Of the decade. That's it. Next week's Christmas Day. I'm not working on Christmas Day. It's my birthday. And my family celebrates Christmas Day. Does your family celebrate Christmas?
We do Christmas and Hanukkah.
You do Christmas and Hanukkah.
Christmas.
Cool. So I guess the big question for our audience now is, are we going to work on New Year's too? Are we taking 2 weeks off here for the holidays?
Maybe we'll have a viewers poll for that.
How about the viewers donate if they want a New Year's show?
Oh, okay. Okay.
Maybe
That's
if we
kind
hit
of
a certain donation level.
Then we'll do a show on New Year's Day.
I think so.
Yeah, because that's a Wednesday, right?
I personally, look, I'm not going to work Christmas. That's my birthday too. I'm turning 43 on Christmas.
Yay.
So I'm not going to work. Yep. I'm getting there. I got my hot pack on while we're talking here today, so I've got proof of my age. But New Year's Day. I don't do much personally. I usually I don't drink anymore. I have kids. You can't get a babysitter on New Year's Eve when you have young children, so you are stuck at home. And so I don't mind working New Year's night. I don't know about you. Your children are grown and you don't require a babysitter.
No, I don't.
Well,
no, but I love to be sober on New Year's Eve and then be one of the few people not hungover in the gym on New Year's Day morning. And I see all these people at the gym that I never have seen before, and I'm totally healthy, no alcohol in my system. And I see people that you only see once a year.
Right.
So you say, oh, hey, hi, and then you never see them again.
Do seriously people go to the gym that first day? Like, I'd wait until the second, man, because
they're
they're
gonna do it right.
Oh, they're crazy.
And never again.
Well, on behalf, Diane, before we get the show started, on behalf of New Jersey Revolution Radio and our sponsors, we got you a Christmas present. All right, so that's for you.
Uh-oh.
All right.
Am I supposed to open it up?
You
now?
can if you want. You can if you want. It's something from like I said, that is from our sponsors and our donors. So we got you. That's there you go. So that is yes. So from
the coffee house.
From the coffee house in Edison, New Jersey.
Wonderful. They help us do the show at least maybe once a month. They have some excellent teas. Yep. What kind of tea is this?
So I got you the chamomile, which I know you like. I know you like the chamomile, and then I think the other is a green tea.
Like these beautiful.
So that's all organic, GMO free. I got I hit all your check boxes, I believe. So there you go. Enjoy. Thanks for all your support. And again, thanks to our donors and our sponsors out there for supporting us during the year. It's been a good year for New Jersey Revolution Radio. It really has. Yes. It really has been a great New Jersey Revolution Radio and year for us. And you can see on our sponsorship table, as well as the coffee house, we have Lori Endicott Thomas, who's been on the show before. You interviewed Lori, right? Or did I? I think you did. She wrote the book. It's called, here it is. Hold on a minute. Not Trivial, How Studying Traditional Liberal Arts Can Set You Free. You interviewed her, right? And then she also wrote the book on narcissism.
Narcissism
and the
narcissist. What we discussed.
Right. Because that was it's so that's our sponsorship table tonight. And if you would like to sponsor New Jersey Revolution Radio, either personally or through your small business or whatever, and you'd like to place an item on our sponsorship table, you can email us info@njrevolutionradio.com, and we can make that happen for you. We're not a big dollar thing either. Small donations will do.
No amount is too small. Yep,
that's right. Okay, so we have to get going with good news, really, towards the end of the year. Okay. And we have to start off with Cosecha, our comrades at Cosecha having one of the larger political victories I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Which is how to define it, really.
It was beautiful. It was definitely so many activists from so many different organizations. Our wonderful comrades with Wind of the Spirit, of course, with Cosecha, and many, many other activists, and just people who were showing up because they cared so deeply about this issue. And I know you and I talked when the news was breaking. I said, oh, I thought it just went through the assembly, but it went through the assembly and the Senate.
It happened so fast. So I got so much news so quickly.
Yeah.
It was hard to discern what exactly had happened from the different reports, because the assembly passed it, reports went out, then the Senate passed it, and reports went out after that. So I too myself was a little confused for about an hour as to where it was. But when I really saw the confirmation and the article that I sent you is great. And I was just thinking about, like, we always have this horrible, stupid debate on the white left, mostly about revolution versus reform. And, this is something that brought material gains.
Yes.
And I think that's where the discussion needs to be had more than like the stupid kind of argument of a revolution versus reform, which is really just a way for us to bicker amongst ourselves over tactics and strategy.
And we really just have to get shit done.
This got shit done.
Just get shit
and,
done.
I've been saying, fuck the police. And my sign off here is to, that police can quit their jobs. And we heard when Kosecha was here, and we've heard, fuck ICE quite a bit. And it really has got me thinking that this, fuck the police originated, of course, from the NWA song. And anybody that's ever seen the movie, the story behind that song is played out in that movie, where the band is just on the corner, minding their own business. The cops come up, start harassing them. But when their white Jewish producer comes out, and talks to the police let them go. And they come back and record the song, Fuck the Police, right? So it's a really good, it's a powerful scene in the movie, right? And I think about how that has evolved into what is really a political line, right? And I'll even admit, I'm a heavy metal guy. I'm a white kid with long hair. I try to be edgy. I am edgy, and you get made fun of for that at times, but I use that as trying to push the narrative, right? And I think maybe some of my use of these terms has been of that vein, just trying to push the narrative and be edgy, if you will. But really, when they did this, they took legitimate political steps on long political thought, because what they did was they fucked up ICE's ability to pull over drivers and have the state police or county police or town cops cooperate with ICE. And most of the people that are locked up by this terrorist organization are locked up after traffic stops. Yeah. And so, I think it's important to understand that, when we use these terms and these kind of shocking terms, and I know you don't hear them in mainstream media, you're not going to hear anybody say fuck the police on CNN or anything like that. But I'm coming to a place, I guess, at least in my own political thought, and I'm seeing it kind of evolve, that it's not a shock term anymore. It's a term, and these terms are meant to change social dogmas, change, if you're a Marxist, you believe in inserting differences into the social fabric. That's where I'm saying, and that's where I think Kosecha has really just done something amazing, because they've really, they've put a big dent in ICE and their ability to terrorize a community that they're a part of. Yeah,
no, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I know we were both at the action that Kosecha did in downtown Newark on October 24th. And you just see the real effectiveness of the work of activists, of direct action, bringing home the goods, right? Yeah.
It's material gains in the ground, and I wonder what's next. And I did, they had a conference call tonight. I messaged with Alejandro, who I've been texting with, and has been a great point of contact for New Jersey Revolution Radio. And we want to thank Alejandro personally, for keeping in touch with us and keeping me informed, so I could let our audience know what's going on. But there's a lot of people thinking. I just wonder what's coming next. I mean, I can't wait to hear what they're talking about. Because certainly, on the ultimate goal of Kosecha, I know the stated goal, of course, is all 11 million people that are here undocumented be granted full citizenship. And I don't know that they endorse open borders. I don't want to speak for them. I've never heard that line.
Yeah, I'm not
whether
sure
they do, but I do in New Jersey Revolution Radio here. Certainly endorse an open borders position.
Yeah. But we know, paths to citizenship. Even Ronald Reagan in the 80s did amnesty programs and paths to citizenship that Bill Clinton and Obama couldn't come near. And I don't get me wrong, can't stand Ronald Reagan. But hey, it's the time has come to move on these issues, and this is a beautiful first step.
I think the path to citizenship should just be a road. I don't really know that there needs to be any kind of, the amnesty is great. We need the amnesty, but it's just come on over. People have been doing it for millions of years.
Yeah,
we walk around.
Shocking to.
It isn't, and I think we've accepted kind of like borders are normal and nationalism is normal. It's not. For the better part of human history, we kind of walked around without borders and nonsense, especially on this continent. My ancestors over in Europe drew a lot of borders, but they weren't big on it over here with indigenous peoples, and I think you can see the detriment to people that
Yeah.
live amongst borders, and it's not a good thing. They're just not
Yeah.
good things.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good. And then the
Okay.
other shocking thing,
Okay.
which blew my doors off. I like to think of myself as a good predictor of political stuff, and I don't mind when I've made some big mistakes though. As anybody who predicts stuff, one is Donald Trump. I didn't predict that shit. I didn't predict Donald Trump. I thought I was more than confident that Hillary was going to win that horrible, stupid election, but I was wrong, and that's it. The other big thing I was wrong, and to my credit, I had history on my side when I told everybody that Steve Sweeney was lying and he would never put the legalization of cannabis on the ballot. But I read the article. I read that weed is going to be on the ballot in 2020. And my initial response is, and I saw it like in somebody's Facebook, because I actually started writing to the guy that, you're stupid. They can't do it that quickly. They have to pass it twice, because the rule is you have to get 3/5 to pass it once in both houses, and then it'll be on the ballot automatically next year. Or you can get 50% plus 1 2 years consecutively. So you can vote on what they did of the last couple of times that I've seen it happen. They voted on it in like January towards the end of the lame duck, and then right in the new section they vote on it again, and that will place it on the ballot. So right away my initial thought was, oh, no, you got to do this twice. There's no way they got 3/5 in both houses, because it's the math and all the Sweeney Democrats and everybody that was opposed to it didn't add up to me. Which, sure enough, another thing where I spent about an hour confused looking at different articles and trying to discern the truth. And sure enough, it passed by 3/5 in both houses. And we are going to vote on legalized recreational cannabis, including the rights to cultivate, which is a very interesting caveat and a big, conversation in the legalization community about home grow, cultivation, medicinal home grow. But this would enshrine in our state constitution the right to grow cannabis.
Wow.
It's a big step. I don't know that I personally want to say, yeah, this is a great thing yet. It's hard for me to imagine going against it, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm sure there's going to be little grips and gripes that I have because, I'm me.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering, is there something we're missing, or with this being on the ballot is so I read it once. I like to read things a couple of times and talk to a lot of comrades before I make any kind of position on something like this big, especially somewhere I've been, a vocal advocate, so I don't want to just come out and say, yes, this is great, or no, this is horrible. Yeah. Some of the little debates I've heard is what it does is it says the wording on the language that says subject to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, which could present problems down the road. Now, is that a state cannabis regulatory commission?
Well, everything has to be state because it's illegal federally.
There is currently a state cannabis regulatory commission right now.
Yeah, I think it's what processes my medical card.
Okay.
I think it's what processes my medical card. So, I don't know whether it would expand that commission, rules and regulations, and this could all be subject to a governor, right? You got appointed bodies, and one thing we all seen under Chris Christie's term and other governors' terms is if they don't like an appointed body or the mission of that appointed body, they just either understaff it, defund it, or stock it with idiots.
Yeah.
And
a lot of that
I mean, and there's no shortage of idiots. So, what they do is, they'll
in most of the state house, right? No shortage.
It's true, so there's no shortage of that. And, so I guess there's some concern as to the control that the governor and the governor's office would have over these appointments. And there's other concerns, but I mean, the counterpoint on that, and I brought that up, I saw that people, was that, in fact, it's in the Constitution that we're allowed to grow weed, and you can't get around that. You can't, in other words, even though you could screw with this body and the regulation body can be messed with, you can at no point ever again pass a law making it illegal to grow cannabis. Okay.
So I'll have to move over some of those tomato plants next year.
There you go. Not next year. So it'll be on the ballot next year.
Okay. So.
And the way they rolled it out,
garden plot a little bigger this year and get ready for it.
Yep, and I know that the way they rolled it out in Let me see if they can hear the music.
Okay.
The way they rolled it out in Maine, the governor was disapproving. So the governor was he stonewalled them, and basically they passed it by referendum or whatever in the state constitution ballot initiative.
Okay.
But then they were charged. The legislature was charged with passing bills to create the regulatory circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would pass these bills for like 4 or 5 years. They would pass a bill every 6 months, and the governor would just not sign it.
Yeah.
So while it's been law that cannabis is recreational legal in Maine for some time now, you still can't. There's still no weed stores. You still can only go to the dispensaries and get your medicinal. You can grow at home.
Oh, you can.
They do have a home where I think you can grow 6 plants in Maine, something like that.
But I guess nobody is able to sell it. You can grow it at home and give it to your friends because they don't have the appropriate regulatory commission to okay.
So for those of you out whoops, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't know. Are you contacting our guests?
Yeah, he dropped off the Zoom there, so I'm seeing. I was hoping he'd come back. I'm just making sure we don't have any technical difficulties. We could do commercials. If we could do commercials. I didn't want to cut you off. I still got commercials, and then share. Everybody, I got 6 watchers right now. Share. If everybody gets another watcher, we'll have 12 for our main interview. Wahid Omar from Afghanistan.
The way the algorithms are, you don't know how many people are actually.
There he is.
You don't know how many people are actually viewing. You have to ignore those numbers.
That's true.
They're always screwy. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I've heard, I've said like 6, and then other people tell me, I see 10, 12, whatever.
Yeah. So ignore it.
Okay, so we do have our guests. Let's do our commercials very quickly.
Okay.
And then we're going to get to our guest, Wahid Omar. Hi, over there, brother. Can you hear me? There he is. Okay, good. So.
Hi, Wahid. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, there you go. We're just going to do a couple of quick commercials here, and then we're going to get right to you. Wine, Women, and Revolution have a new episode on Monday. Heather Warburton, my comrade, fellow senior partner here, senior organizer. I'm sorry. She is our creative director here. We're shuffling titles a little bit. Our creative director here at New Jersey Revolution Radio. She also does a great bi-weekly show called Wine, Women, and Revolution. Check it out. This Monday, she's releasing a podcast featuring Ambition the Poet. Ambition is an awesome guy. I've been getting into a lot of spoken word myself. So check that out. And also, 360 Poetry Night with Justice, Saturday, December 28th. I don't know how much you guys pay attention to our Facebook feeds, but you see me there once a month yelling at people to come down and have a good time with me. I'm going to be doing it again this month. And if you're there with me, then I won't yell at you to come down. So 360 Poetry Night with Justice has inspired me a lot. It's not just like a night of entertainment. It's a night of sharing and art and music and just having a really good time with some really chill people. So there's revolutionary thought there, but it's in an atmosphere that you're just chilling, and it's a great vibe. So you can check out our live streams, go on our videos, see what goes down at Poetry Night, and you can make it out there. Again, we want to thank our sponsors on the sponsorship table tonight with the Hammer and Sickle. Lori Endicott Thomas, author of Not Trivial, How Studying the Traditional Liberal Arts Can Set You Free, and of course, the Coffee House in Edison, New Jersey. And with that, we are once again. Oh, yep, there you go. She's got it up.
Lovely mug.
Those just came in too.
Purchase. They're beautiful.
Those
Great
just
size. You don't have to keep refilling your tea or your coffee.
While you do the interview, I go upstairs. You gave me a water bottle too. I got a water bottle from the coffee house. It's nice. So they got some good little tchotchkes over there, and their ground coffee I get all the time. They got some great Christmas gifts. So if you're looking for stocking stuffers, stop by the coffee house in Edison. That's where I did my Christmas shopping today.
Yeah, excellent.
There you go. All right. So we're going to welcome. Yes, very good. We're going to welcome Wahid Omar here for our main interview with Diane. Wahid just got back from Afghanistan. And we have seen in the last couple of weeks these Afghanistan papers come out. Diane, you may know a little bit more than me. I've read a little bit into it, but the truth is there's not a lot out there on this. So again, something mainstream media is not covering, but we at New Jersey Revolution Radio are covering. So thank you for joining us tonight, Mr. Omar, and I'll let you meet Diane Moxley, our host.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Omar. And I believe we also have Madeline Hoffman with us. Madeline, can you hear us? Okay, I'm not able to hear.
I'll message Madeline while you get the interview
Okay,
started.
we'll get,
all right. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, we are so thrilled to have Wahid Omar with us. He lives part-time in Kabul and part-time in Colorado. And I know you have hosted activists in Kabul, and you have been going back and forth between Afghanistan and the U.S. for how long have you been?
Well, since 2001, actually, when I was able to go back because I was myself a refugee from Afghanistan when the Soviet army actually invaded the country in 1978. So since then, since 2001, I was involved in Afghanistan in different capacity, but mainly I was working there for the improvement of higher education in the country. And I was there the last 10 years full time. Recently, I'm just going back and forth.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And you just flew back in to the U.S., correct?
That is correct. I just arrived yesterday.
Oh, thank you so much for jumping on our show this evening. I know that's a long flight and a lot of travel for you. So I thank you so much for joining us this evening.
You're welcome.
And yeah, you were mentioning from 1978, and we have, we're in year 2019, and Afghanistan has had a long history of foreign and U.S. interference, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And as Brian was saying earlier, with all of this hysteria surrounding the impeachment, everybody has just pretty much missed the Afghanistan papers. And I know it was journalists affiliated with the Washington Post that I guess it was about 2 weeks ago. Is that correct? That they started distributing the information they received from FOIA requests and actually even legal battles, correct? It went beyond FOIA requests. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, that's about the time that it went out.
Yeah. And from what you were talking about with the interference before 2001, I thought it was interesting that one of the things that hit me with this story breaking is that even the U.S. government and the U.S. military that was over there really have no idea of who was who in Afghanistan and what their end game was and the history of Afghanistan. And so you arrived back in Afghanistan in about 2001. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, it was only in 2001 that we were able to go back in Afghanistan, and the goal was to find out where we could help and how we could help, because the country was in a very disastrous, situation after two decades of wars and and desolation. So when we came back in 2001, the country was in a chaotic state with almost all the infrastructure destroyed, with no economy, no jobs, no employment, with millions of refugees, living in made-up camps, etc. And with schools also being closed. So there was so much to do that we didn't know how to start. And so I remember, when in 2001, like, almost 18 years ago, when I landed at the airport in Kabul, the airport was completely disorganized. There was nepotism and corruption going on at the airport when we arrived. It was not a very good feeling that when we just arrived at the airport, because I knew that airport when I left from Afghanistan in 1978, and it was much different. Well, then, I heard about these papers. Quite frankly, I was shocked. I was shocked because not only the content of these, the results and of the U.S. intervention, and the truth was, given in those papers. But recently, I went back to Kabul, and the airport has changed. The situation at the airport was kind of the same as when I entered Afghanistan in 2001. So it was disorganized. People were not following the rules, the regulations. No one was waiting in line. The custom people were trying to get their own people, out of the line. And so it shows, signs of disorganization and corruption, which reminded me, when I just entered Afghanistan in 2001. So then, inside the city, you could see that things were much different than, let's say, in 2005, which was kind of, a time that was a relative stability in the country. So I guess for the Afghan people, there's a big question, because the U.S. military, lost probably a lot of people in Afghanistan. I heard about 23,000 people died, and 700,000 people were deployed in Afghanistan, and a good percentage of them, I think it's 22,000, got injured.
Yeah.
And God knows how many of those young men they returned with trauma caused by the war.
Maybe untreated, undiagnosed illnesses and so, trauma. Yes.
So you have to think also about the Afghan side of how many people died, in Afghanistan. How many of the non-military, security person, civilian people died in Afghanistan. And, I was engaged and involved a lot in higher education. And one of the areas we were trying to help was, counseling in universities for students. I can tell you, I don't have the exact percentage in front of me, but the majority of the people in Afghanistan have emotional problems, and they're mentally challenged because of a lot of, trauma of the war, explosions, bombs in the city that never stopped for 18 years, and it got worse and worse. So that's the question, the Afghan people are asking today. What happened? What happened to the billions of dollars that was spent on military, on the Ministry of Interior, for the police force, and so much money, spent to improve the life of Afghanistan, to improve governance, to improve, agriculture and the infrastructure of the country. And if you think about it, Kabul didn't have electricity And I'm sure Madeline remembers when she was in Afghanistan. And today it's the same situation. 18 years later, Kabul still don't have reliable electricity. So the employment situation is not very good in the country. It's gotten worse and worse. And even with the international support and donor support, those Afghans who got trained and have better qualification, they usually leave the country because they don't want to stay. They're afraid of being killed, by a bomb or something that happens there. It's a big question for the Afghan people today. What will happen to them now? Because obviously, the government of Afghanistan is very weak in terms of being a sustainable government and a government that is able to generate revenues, sustainable revenues for the country. And still Afghanistan depends entirely on foreign aids. And so the question is, what will happen today now that the US is talking about making peace with the Taliban and leaving Afghanistan? So these are very serious questions that the Afghan people are asking today.
And I guess it can be maybe there's a fear in Afghanistan that with the news story of the Afghanistan papers that we could cut and run. And we put a lot of money in, but I understand even some of the information that comes out from the Afghanistan papers talks about the corruption with the U.S. Agency for International Development, giving billions of dollars, but not having proper oversight and lots of corruption going on, probably on the U.S. end. And if you don't know from what it sounds like with the U.S. military and the U.S. government, not having the right picture of what the history of Afghanistan is, or maybe it's a willful, intentional ignorance, and then not having a strategy, not having an end game, rushing in with, I'd say in less than 3 weeks of really sparse negotiating before we entered the Afghanistan war in 2001. I don't know how the U.S. government could have had a strategy with basically pretty much launching this war in about 2.5 weeks. So I'm sure right now, if what you're saying is, you're feeling that the Kabul airport and the city feels like it did back in early 2000s, right? So do you think there's a fear that the U.S., not that we've been doing a good job, we've been screwing it up from day one, but is there a fear that we're going to cut and run? Is that what's going on?
Absolutely, because this is not the first time. I'm sure you remember in 1978, when there was a coup in Afghanistan and the Russian army invaded, there was a big U.S. support for the Mujahideen at the time. But then, things changed and Afghanistan was left alone completely in a civil war situation, which allowed the Taliban to take over at the time.
Yeah.
So, that experience, the Afghan people have seen it in history, and they are really afraid that the same thing will happen again. That, without an exit strategy, if the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan, then, most of the things that, or the minor changes that happen in the country, that will be lost too. I think mostly the question the Afghan people is about the military and the police force and the amount of money that was spent in training, the police force in Afghanistan and the military as well. The project of USAID, actually did change some stuff in Afghanistan, that improves, access for female education and generally, education in Afghanistan.
Okay, good.
But what the Afghan people are afraid today is that these minor, achievement and successes in Afghanistan will be taken away, and again when the Taliban will come back to Afghanistan. Yeah. This is the fear that people have. The concern is that, without security, you do not succeed in development. And through 18 years, the security situation in Afghanistan has not improved. And in fact, it got worse and worse. So without, people are fleeing the country because, there is no security. The majority of people from the countryside came to Kabul in hope of finding, a job or a meal, because the situation is so difficult in the countryside. There's war going on, actually. Yeah. And so you find out a city overpopulated by 7 million people almost, and the infrastructure of Kabul city is only for 700,000. So you can just imagine the chaos, and the difficulties that Kabul as a city is experiencing today. So without security, also you have corruption that is, a big problem in Afghanistan. Because of lack of security, there's corruption. Because of lack of governance, proper governance, lack of leadership, there is a lack of, transparency, and it gives way for corruption. Yeah. But most of the corruption, I think, from what we heard in Afghanistan, was in the army and the police force, because the U.S. Military, from what we heard, they used cash to buy people, in the provinces. I mean, the tons of cash. I'm talking about, lots of money. And so allegiance bought with cash are actually not sustainable. They eventually, when you run out of cash, they'll look somewhere else for cash, and they can do anything they want for money. So the strategies, were wrong. The way they ignored the culture in Afghanistan as well, caused many problems. So yes, there was this issue that they didn't know the country, but maybe it was worth knowing the country first before, spending millions of dollars in the country.
Yeah, and to have, the entry into this war, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I do not believe that we bombed the towers, but it does start to look like the U.S. government has different wars waiting up their sleeves for the right actions at the right time to happen, and then take advantage, is what I think happens, because this happened so quickly, just under the idea of turning over Osama bin Laden after 9/11, then led to an 18 plus going on year 19 year war. And as you were saying earlier, with the civilian casualties, the U.S. government used to keep account of civilian casualties, but decades ago we stopped because it was really bad for war PR. So I don't know if we'll ever have an accurate count of the civilian casualties in Afghanistan, but it's heartbreaking to know that even in just this past July, August, and September, I think the number was about over 1,000 civilians in Afghanistan were killed. And we're still there. We're still at war, and it's over. If our U.S. government says it's about $1 trillion, it's probably even more. So we've poured so much money in to so much death and destruction, and we're in year 18 plus, and we still don't have a strategy. So what can the U.S. do now? We broke the country. We don't fix it. We never fix the countries we break. We shouldn't have entered to begin with, but what do we do now from your perspective? What can we possibly do to right this terrible wrong?
I think that, it's a very, very difficult question. I'm an educator, I'm in education. I'm not a politician, but but for sure, if the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan today and strike a deal with the Taliban, there must be conditions to that, to this deal, and the conditions for the deal needs to involve, the whole diaspora of the Afghan people. It should not be a quick withdrawal from Afghanistan because of, elections and stuff like that in the U.S. It should be a very informed exit involving all parties to make sure that Afghanistan will not plunge back into terrorism in the future, that the small gains that were achieved during 18 years, they continue to support these gains. And I'm thinking about, mainly education, because, I'm interested in that, higher education as well. But also other, ministries of Afghanistan. I think that it is such a difficult country to rule now because the policy of divide and rule, that we inherited it from the English, long time ago in Afghanistan and all over the world, actually, damaged the country so much that the unity that this country had, despite having, 7 ethnic groups, was there during the time of the king, a long time ago. But today, there's such a situation in Afghanistan that one ethnic group is against the other one, and that has never improved. And so it's a total failure here, and the unity of the Afghan people needs to be considered in this withdrawal from Afghanistan. But also the American government needs to have a clear strategy about, not leaving the country at the mercy of poverty and at the mercy of, the Taliban, who will bring back a religious form of government in the country. And no international donor will be interested in supporting such a regime. So what is the next government in Afghanistan in place? That's a big question for the Afghan people. I quite frankly, after 18 years, I'm kind of lost as what the solution will be. It's very difficult for me.
It's not, there's no easy solutions after 18 plus years of of chaos and so much destruction, that, like you're saying, you're even in the major city of Kabul, still not having electricity, having, I'm sure there's infrastructure problems all over the place. So perhaps, and I'm hoping it's not going to be tied to debt, but perhaps the U.S. can assist in rebuilding some of the infrastructure, strengthening the schools, and not cutting and run, leaving, like you said, the security and, the security compromised. That's only going to cause more deaths if we leave too quickly. And I guess I didn't even think of it from that perspective, that maybe some of the powers that be wanted to drop the Afghanistan papers to get public opinion in the U.S. just to say, cut and run, right? Is that a possibility? Is that what... I don't want to have a conspiracy theory out there because there's a lot of them, but...
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. We do have Madeline Hoffman with us now. So Madeline and Wahid, I know you guys know each other and are connected from Madeline's stay in Afghanistan. Yes. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And
okay.
In fact, I was there in 2005. The year that Wahid mentioned was sort of a turning point in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So yes, I have a lot to say, but I'll respond as you guide me.
Okay.
As you ask me questions.
Well, why don't you respond to what you wanted to respond to at this time? Because I know we were having some dialogue there, and I'm sorry I didn't bring you in earlier. So
yes,
go ahead, Madeline.
Okay.
Yeah, from your perspective.
Yeah, I was the director of a nonprofit peace organization that actually opposed the U.S. war on Afghanistan before it began. And we were one of very limited set of voices at the time that was opposed to U.S. intervention in Afghanistan because we didn't see it as an appropriate response to 9/11.
Yeah.
And also, so many of the people in this country were afraid to speak out against that war. Due to 9/11.
It was an uncomfortable time to speak out against. Yeah.
Yes, it was. And we organized a march through the city of Newark in early November. We received many disturbing phone calls at our office from people who said, America, love it or leave it. What are you doing? Go get a job. Why are you opposed to this war? I got hate emails saying we'll strap you onto a nuclear missile and send you over there and nuke the place. It was a very difficult time. We got lengthy answering machine messages playing the hail to the chief and you name it, anything to try to portray us as unpatriotic and anything to try to stop us from operating as an organization.
Yeah.
But we felt that international police action was needed to go after Osama bin Laden and not a full-scale war. And you did mention that, it's like the United States has these, and I won't call it a war because it was, again, not declared by Congress, not approved by Congress specifically. But we have these military interventions in our back pocket for use when needed. And I remember I went in 2005. So, and I think there had been some 12 or 24 delegations that had gone with Global Exchange, the Benjamin's group. They had gone with Global Exchange to visit Afghanistan, and our delegation was specifically to meet with women, Afghan women, to see what Afghan women were doing, or to learn what Afghan women were doing, and how that was changing the country, or if it was changing the country. And I remember Wahid said he was shocked at the Afghanistan papers. Well, I was shocked at the beginning, talking to Afghan people, because I thought people in Afghanistan would be against the war, just like we were in the United States. And the Afghan people I met were not against the war, but they raised a very important question then, which, as somebody born and raised in the United States, I answered in my head.
Okay.
You know, they asked the Afghan people we met and spoke to, said, is the United States here to help the Afghan people, or is the United States here to pursue their own self-interest? And I had the answer in my head. Teacher, I know the answer. The U.S. is here, was in Afghanistan to help to promote its own self-interest. And I remember vividly a couple of conversations with women, one about the cost of a health clinic. And I'm not remembering, but it was very, I want to say $21,000 to build a health clinic. And to build a health clinic taking advantage of the solar power in Afghanistan and such. And I remember someone saying, because Laura Bush had come to Afghanistan either while I was there or just before, or she was coming just after. And they said, she's here for PR purposes only, because the health clinics aren't built with the input of the Afghan people. They're not facing the sun. They're not being built on a lower scale. You know, all these engineers and everybody are being called in, but it's not necessary to have a fully functioning clinic in Afghanistan. So it was pretty clear to me. Oh, and there was a highway from Kandahar, I think, to Kabul. And I remember coming home and hearing Alan Dershowitz, I believe, make the case that the United States had so helped Afghanistan that they built this road from Kandahar to Kabul. Well, when I was in Afghanistan, the people there said, oh, that wasn't for us. That was to move military vehicles from north to south.
So they probably couldn't even use the road.
Well, maybe
eventually.
If they had a car, if you had a car, you could. But
that road is road. Sorry, today is a dirt road, by the way.
The dirt road now?
Yeah.
Well, because I did hear from some people that it was not constructed well, and it was already starting to show signs of decay and destruction.
That's correct.
And if you have military trucks back and forth and back and forth, it probably destroyed it.
Corruption also about companies who are building infrastructure in Afghanistan using very low quality products and result in taking all the money. So it's due to corruption also.
Corruption, and I think I want to go back to something else that was said, which is, I don't think the United States and some of the Afghan women I spoke to, as well as read pieces from later, from collections of writings, they were clear that this war or this military action was not being fought for them.
Yeah.
It was not being fought to liberate Afghan women. And one woman in a writing that I'll always remember, because I read it several times when I came home to give a report on what I saw, is that she wrote in a very poetic way or dramatic way. You know, she wanted the military action to continue because at least the spotlight was shining on the situation for Afghan women. And also, this is something I never forgot, and I don't think it's said enough by U.S. media. I met Afghan women judges, women lawyers, women journalists, and they asked, because we asked them, well, when you go home to the United States, when we go home to the United States, what do you want us to say? And one of them said, or a couple of them said, well, we don't understand why when we see video footage from Afghanistan, all we see are pictures of women in burqas. Because there are a lot of other kinds of women, and there's a lot of strength in the women of Afghanistan, and they were very much correct about that. Here in the United States, we get the impression that Afghan women are weak, and they are not. And last thing about one more thing about the Pentagon Papers, Freudian slip. Yep. Freudian slip. The United States actually wanted to make Afghanistan Russia's Vietnam back in the 70s. Wahid mentioned it earlier. But the odd thing about this is that the information coming out of these papers is damning, and it really shows the United States for who they are and what the United States was actually doing and is still doing in Afghanistan. But do you know, you may have said this before I tuned in, the U.S. media just isn't covering it. It's just not, it's not news. It's not, well, the impeachment is the news, not the 3 different presidential administrations, including Barack Obama's,
that this war
that were all
existed through.
In what has been created in Afghanistan and all the money that's been drained for that. And I hope we can change that. For years, we tried to get media on Afghanistan after I returned from Afghanistan, and we collected thousands of 2 tons of sewing materials for the women of Afghanistan. We tried to get in the news about what was going on there, and nothing happened. No one bit, no media bit, until Obama was to decide whether to send 50,000 more troops to Afghanistan. And then all of a sudden, the media were interested. This is an ongoing story, has been an ongoing story, and there have been people trying to get it heard, but our media just don't care about it. Except you.
And all of us. That's why we're on tonight. And I think from what, and if Wahid has any other closing words, but I'll just kind of reinforce what Wahid has said and what Madeline has said, that it's important that the U.S. doesn't cut and run, and that the voices of the people in Afghanistan be heard. And it's complex. Like you're saying, with the 7 different ethnic groups and trying to have unity. I'm sure just having this endless war does not help for unity sake. And I'm sorry, Madeline, go ahead.
Yeah,
let me just,
I wanted to respond to that too. And I know, because it's come up over the years with the surge and the 50,000 additional troops and other issues like that. The United States, this is my opinion, and it's different from Wahid's, I think, but by the United States being there in Afghanistan, it's put a target on everybody's back. And so we said, as a peace organization, I've said and continue to say it, the United States needs to get out sooner as opposed to later. And there are real things that the United States can do. But by saying we shouldn't cut and run, I don't want us to also, I don't want people to think that means we can stay there for 5 more years as we withdraw
a plan,
according to a plan. It's got to be, it's already the longest war in U.S. history. Costliest war terms of human life, well, in terms of financial costs. And so we need to get our act together and leave Afghanistan so that the Afghan people can put it back together. And I remember another very vivid memory for me is when I left in 2005. There was we visited a castle, an old castle, and it was being reconstructed by the Afghan people. And there was a guy sitting up in a window, an Afghan fellow, and then another Afghan fellow on the ground, on the sidewalk. And he was taking one brick and throwing it up to the fellow sitting in the window, one brick at a time. It was maybe 12 feet high. So he would take a brick, toss it, the fellow in the window would catch it and put it on the wall. And I remember thinking that about the Afghan people at the time, thinking about the Afghan people in this way, that everyone is tired of war, so tired of war, decades of war, as Wahid said.
Yeah.
And people are willing to do things like that, one brick at a time, rebuild Kabul and rebuild Afghanistan. The United States has to let the Afghan people do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Madeline. And Wahid, is there anything you'd like to say as a closing statement or anything we haven't touched on?
One point, really, I agree with Madeline, is that everybody is really tired of this very, very long war. However, I think that that currently Afghanistan is on the verge of selecting a new president and a new government. And that has not happened. It has been delayed and delayed and delayed for over 4 months. The results are still not known. And I think this is a tactic between the government, the current government, and the U.S. government, that perhaps, the result should be announced after there's a peace strike deal with the Taliban, because they want probably the Taliban to be part of that government.
Okay.
However, we don't know how this will be possible given the ideological difference between the different parties in Afghanistan, the current government and, the Taliban agenda as well. So there's a big concern that if this is not done appropriately, this exit is done in a rush and leaving the Afghan among themselves, I think the situation will be the same as it was when the Soviet army left Afghanistan. The country, was in a civil war for many years until, the most brutal of the groups, the Taliban, took over. This is exactly what will happen in Afghanistan. So that will be more killing of Afghan innocent people. So we are worried in Afghanistan really about this withdrawal.
Okay.
That's why we think that this should be done not in a rush, but step by step. The condition also of foreign aid in Afghanistan needs to be monitored in a better way. And by that, I mean that any foreign aid for Afghanistan should have conditions and should be based on results also.
Okay.
And a better tracking system of the funds that are given to Afghanistan. Currently, the Afghan government does not have, the capacity to manage funding appropriately. They don't have the people to do it, the capacity to do it, the mechanism to do it. it's still a work in progress. So we really need to be careful about this withdrawal.
Yeah.
Because it's going to have, very deep consequences for the Afghan people.
Yeah.
I mean, for the American people, it's not a big deal. They will just pull out their forces and come back home.
Yeah.
But what will be left over there, will be a big question mark. So hopefully, that this withdrawal will bring some positive, to Afghanistan.
Yeah, and hopefully involve more voices in Afghanistan. And hopefully there can be some type of apparatus set up that has some type of transparency. And I want to thank you so much, Wahid, for coming on our show this evening. And thank you, Madeline. Always a pleasure to have you on. We haven't had you on a while. We'll have to have you on again.
Thanks. Yeah, we do appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
For peace, but a peaceful transition with security for the Afghani people. Yeah. Correct?
Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. It was nice meeting you, Wahid. Our comrade, Madeline Hoffman, of course, is running for Senate. If you don't know, she's the endorsed Green Party candidate for Senate, so check her out.
Running against Cory Booker.
So I guess we're going to say if we raise some money, we'll come for New Year's. I don't want to commit you here, Diane. How much money does our audience have to raise for us to do a New Year's Day show?
I don't know.
Lots.
Oh, lots.
Well, I raised $200 on my personal page, Facebook. So how about $200? If they raise another $200 by the end of the year, $300.
It's New Year's Day.
It's New Year's Day. $400.
$500.
$500. Listen, it's her labor. It's your labor. She just set the value for it. So if New Jersey Revolution Radio, you can go to www.njrevolutionradio.com.
Everybody give $5.
You can donate via PayPal. Donate via Cash App. You can give during Patreon, whatever you can do. But if $500 comes in between now and the end of the year, you'll see us on New Year's Day. If not, we'll see you on January 8th. But we want to make sure everybody who's celebrating whatever they celebrate has a happy one, a healthy one. I hope you get around safe. Don't drink and drive. Don't smoke and drive. Just be careful out there, but enjoy your friends and your families in the holiday year. It can be a rough time of year for a lot of people, but, try and enjoy it. There's a lot of great things out there. I have kids, so it's a lot of fun to enjoy the children, Events going on around the state really quickly. A noir reading for Rockin' a Hard Place is going to happen at Words in Asbury Park, 623 Cookman Avenue. That is Saturday night starting at 6 p.m. You will come celebrate the launch of a new literary venue for stories of bad decisions and desperate people. Poetry 360 night, La Rouge Lounge, Saturday night, December 28th in Newark. And we also, the last event we have is Women, Weed, and Wellness, January 26th at the Cherry Hill Women's Center with our host of Wine, Women, and Revolution, Heather Warburton. Happy New Year, everybody. And just remember, this is Brian Powers, and I'm telling you all that the police can quit their jobs.
My usual sign-off is seeing in the streets, but being it's the holidays and it's really cold, stay inside, have some nice chamomile tea from the coffee house, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.